Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith analyzes corn and soybean markets. Tina Barrett looks at how farm incomes could drop in both 2013 and 2014. Bruce Broderson updates us on the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus in Nebraska. And we'll show you some of the challenges farmers in Brazil and Argentina face in growing their soybeans. Roy Smith is our marketing analyst this week. The USDA Monday released its latest estimates on supply and demand. Domestically, the agency lowered ending stocks by increasing corn exports. In soybeans, it held firm at its ending stocks number of 150 million bushels. Internationally, the USDA increased Brazil's soybean production from 89 to 90 million metric tons. It also lowered Argentina's output from 54.5 to 54 million metric tons. Roy joined us Wednesday afternoon to look at the recent run in soybeans, the cash market for corn, and the February crop report.
It was a little bit of a shock to most people, I think, not necessarily to me specifically, but the reports that we've had since the first of the year have been just a little bit bullish for corn and for soybeans. You know, we're already tight on the soybean supply, yeah. And so, you know, the fact that it really confirmed that in fact those numbers are pretty good, I think is very encouraging.
Let's talk about the recent run that beans have had since July, and a lot of that came last week. Should that have been surprising as you look back on your historical charts?
Not really. What we expect in the soybean chart this time of the year is a trend down into the end of December or 1st of January, and then a little bit of a rally, kind of up and down a little bit before we get into the February time period, which is where we are now. We used to have what we call the John Deere low, which was a pretty pronounced low market in the middle of February. Well, the last 3 or 4 years it hasn't been quite like that, but we still kind of expect some trend down into about the 1st of February, and then a little bit of a rally, and hopefully that'll be a time for people that want to sell some beans to get some sold, although that's not a general recommendation of mine.
Yeah, I know a wise man who says you don't sell beans in February. Now, that wise man is also wearing only a suit coat out shooting outside in the winter. So what do you say to that?
I say I spent the day in a mine workshop and a marketing in a new era workshop, and sort of got caught off guard here by wanting to film in the snow.
That's all Curtis. There's only Curtis. What about the beans part? Do you think selling in February might be applicable this year?
I really don't think so. I think the bean supply is tight enough, and we have somewhat of a handle on what the South American crop is going to be. They've got some of their crop harvested, and you know, my expectation is that we could see this rally continue on up into March or April. Now, just like with corn, don't expect a earth-shaking move, but just to see it gradually eat its way up out of this hole that we've been in would be very encouraging.
The one thing I'll ask you about South America is this uncharted territory if both Brazil and Argentina produce a record crop?
if both of them would produce a record crop, I think that, it's a very unusual situation. It could happen. It's hard to judge by what you hear in commentaries and marketing reports and stuff, just how big that crop really is. The last week of 2013, everybody was expecting prices to be down and then go down some more, and what we've seen is kind of a general turnaround. So, I look at the South American crop, and it's going to be coming online here. They're having some trouble moving it, and maybe some of the prices weren't, or yields weren't as big as what they thought. So I'm not that pessimistic on corn or soybeans, either one right now, not expecting anything big, but maybe stabilizing here in a gentle rally, I guess I'd call it.
Let's move into corn. It's still hanging above $4 cash. Is this an opportunity that maybe you would start to sell into?
I think anytime you get weather that allows you to travel the roads and get into those bins, it's an opportunity to sell some corn, especially after we've had about a 16-cent rally from the bottom, which was back towards the 1st of January. In fact, I think it was the first trading day in January. So, any kind of a rally like that is a time to be making some sales. There's a lot of corn out there, and some of it needs to start moving just any time now.
Update me on what basis numbers look like in your area of Cass County for both soybeans and corn.
Basis in Cass County hasn't really changed any since the last time we talked. Not spectacular, but a lot better than it has been in some previous years when we've had big crops or high prices. So, you watch that basis. If the basis would start to back off a little bit, it might be a signal that it's time to get a little more aggressive in making those sales.
Next week, Mike Briggs will join us to look at cattle markets. The USDA expects U.S. net farm income to drop more than 25% this year. In projections released Tuesday, the agency forecast 2014 net farm income at $95.8 billion. The number is a sharp drop from $130 billion in 2013 and would be the lowest since 2010. Tina Barrett from Nebraska Farm Business recently joined us to look at 2014 break-even levels and said tighter margins might mean farmers and ranchers will need to take a closer look at costs. For the group of producers Tina works with, 2013 saw a substantial dip from 2012 profits.
We're just starting to get real good at processing, but what we're seeing is pretty consistently that we're at about 20% of net income that we saw in 2012. So our average in 2012 was around 400,000, just a little under that, but what we're looking at is maybe somewhere between 80 and 100,000 for net income.
2014, what do you expect to see in 2014? Does that drop continue, or can there be maybe a little bit of a rise?
Any cash flow planning that I've done has been a continued drop. I would guess that we're probably looking more like what we saw for average before in that $40,000 to $50,000 range, especially where we're losing the direct payment. And that's on average about $20,000 to $25,000 per farm. That's going to go away. We don't really have a way to replace that, so we're going to see at least that much of a drop.
What does the cost of living show in these numbers?
Yeah, well, for 2012, our average family living was right at $100,000, and that didn't include the $40,000 that was spent on taxes. So that's a huge expense. Didn't seem so bad if we were making $400,000, but quite frankly, if we're making $80,000 now and still spending $140,000 on those two items, we're starting to lose net worth. And so, I think it's a real concern, and an even bigger concern as we go into 2014.
You broke down the numbers here for corn, what it would cost to produce this year. How bad is it?
Yeah, what I did was I took 2012's numbers and added 10% so that we could kind of get an idea. So I think it's a pretty conservative estimate, but we're looking at $459 for just farm costs, and if we include $100,000 for family living, it's more like $521. So either way, we're out of the realm of what's marketable at this point.
Absolutely out of the realm of it. When is the last time that has happened? When is the last time you've seen a negative number like that?
We haven't seen negative net return since 2005, and it hasn't been that long ago, but it sure feels like a long time. And when I look at the cost from that year, we had average corn cost at $404 per acre, and in 2012 it was $732, and I was looking at like something close to $840 for projections for 2014. So we're more than double where we were in total cost the last time we had a negative net return.
For the producer listening to this, what's the message to him or her?
Well, I think it really means we need to be diligent in some cash flow projections, and not just a cash flow that you throw together for the bank, but some, working cash flow that you're using on a regular basis and updating and really controlling any costs that we can. And you got to go back and look at those costs that made sense 2 years ago. Like maybe, it was an additive to a fertilizer program or chemical program that got you an extra 5 bushels an acre and cost $25. That was a good deal. You still made some money. But that $25 expense for 5 bushels now isn't going to return you anything. So that's maybe something that we need to look at backing off.
Are you seeing the spending or the lending, for that matter, decreasing or slowing down?
Well, I haven't seen a whole, spending is it's so hard to stop spending once you're used to spending that, especially on the family living side. And I think that's something that we need to watch just as much. And I think we need to pay attention to the lenders and how uncomfortable they're getting with seeing these losses and how long they're going to stick with you if we're going to have sustained losses for a few years.
Tina recently wrote an article on tighter margins and controlling costs. That can be found on the Crop Watch website. We'll also link to it on the Market Journal homepage. More than 20 states have recorded a positive test for the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, and now PEDV has also moved into Canada with 13 confirmed cases in Ontario. Nebraska joined the list of states with PEDV in late 2013 and has continued to log positive tests. We talked with Bruce Broderson on campus earlier this week to discuss the impact of the virus across the country and in this state.
We've seen some cases here in Nebraska in the last month or two, and many of these cases present the same as what's been reported in other states with high death losses in nursery and farrowing rooms, and then not so serious as far as the finishing units are concerned or the gestation units. So a very similar picture to what everybody else has reported.
Initially when the ASV and a lot of universities were looking at this, they were trying to determine where it came from and how it was being tracked. One of the things that's now being looked at a little more is whether or not feed can hold the virus. What is the update there? Well,
from what I understand, the virus has been detected in feed, but it's not in an infectious form. So the virus is inactive in those feed samples. And I understand that there's some work that's been done where they've spiked feed samples, and that is infectious with live virus. But the rendering processes inactivate the virus with the high temperatures that they treat that material with.
The Ohio Department of Agriculture has now said that they found in their herds a virus that's like PED. What does that mean?
Well, there's a certain gene in that virus which is different than the quote-unquote typical PED virus, and it's classified a little differently as far as a different genus is concerned, and so it's they've called it a Delta virus, Delta coronavirus, and they're trying to track down where that originated from at this point in time too.
When you get samples here at the lab at UNL, are you capable of testing or determining the difference between those two and then TGE as well?
Well, we've got a test that will detect almost all coronaviruses, and right now we're trying to validate whether that Delta coronavirus will be detected by our tests too. We can differentiate between TGE and PED viruses.
We talked in November, I think, when it was starting to get a little cooler, and we talked about some things that producers could do on their operations. Refresh me on what the disinfectant situation should be like in your farm.
Well, of course, remove all the organic matter from the surfaces that you can. The disinfectants that are most effective are bleach for one thing, and then one-stroke Environ is another disinfectant that you can use, and Virkon S is another one. The quaternary ammonium-based disinfectants aren't effective against these viruses, so you need to concentrate or focus on the type of disinfectants that you'd use.
You can find more information on the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus on the American Association of Swine Veterinarians website at aasv.org. In our second segment of our three-part series detailing soybean production in Argentina and Brazil, this week we'll look at growing conditions in each country. Farmers in both Argentina and Brazil expect to mirror the U.S. in 2014 in that margins will be tighter than during previous seasons. In Brazil, a caterpillar caused trouble early in beans, and in Argentina, concerns over precipitation were starting to emerge during our mid-January trip. There are stark differences between here and there. The use of crop insurance isn't widespread and irrigation is sparse. As you'll see, the benefits and challenges for both countries are very different than those in the Midwest. This is the beginning of soybean harvest in Brazil's largest producing state of Mato Grosso. Unlike the mythical pictures, the combines don't move in a V formation with planters chasing behind. But the field is so large that you can't accurately count the number of machines working. Farming here is measured in hectares. 1 hectare equals about 2.5 acres. Here in Mato Grosso, how much land does the average farmer have or use?
The big ones, they raise 2,000 to 3,000 hectares, and they account for 25% of the land. And most of the farmers, 75%, are small or medium farms, and they have like small farms like 10 to 20 hectares, and they still planting the rotation between soybean and corn.
The government-funded Embrapa conducts ag research on crops and livestock across Brazil. It says this area of the country receives about 100 inches of rain a year. That adds to warm weather, culminating in good to great growing conditions for soybeans. It also takes some of the risk away and can impact whether producers buy crop insurance.
Here in our region, it's really hard to lose with our crops. I mean, you just lose because of when there's too much rain. But even then, it's just once in every 10 years that you might lose money with your crop. So that's why I don't really use crop insurance myself.
Elizalde estimates less than 10% of producers around his area utilize crop insurance. He believes the government-issued insurance is too expensive and believes it should provide a better subsidy system to incentivize more producers into participating. Elizalde says he's farming more than 8,500 acres of soybeans this year, followed by a second crop of corn. It's uncommon in this area to see a first crop of corn. Brazil is expected to have planted about 16 million acres of corn for the first harvest, compared with more than 22 million acres for the second harvest. The total acres planted for soybeans is about 73 million. While Argentina will rotate crops, it still leans heavily on soybeans. The ratio to corn is about 6-to-1.
We started with soybeans during the 80s. And now we don't have a real balanced situation between soybean and other crops. We have to change that.
Santiago del Solar Dorrego owns land across Argentina and says there are reasons why farmers have shifted so dramatically towards beans. Soybeans are cheap to plant, especially since most farmers use no-till. With good rains in the Pampas region north of Buenos Aires, yields can be between 4 and 5 tons per hectare, or about 59 to 74 bushels per acre. And government quotas on exports of other crops influence planting choices. Not many Argentine farmers own harvest equipment, so they'll contract to have their crops picked. The soybean harvest will start in the north and move south, with the peak occurring in March and April. Juan Elizalde manages a farm growing 4,500 acres of soybeans. The total will be split between first and second crops. Juan says there can be a noticeable financial difference between first and second soy.
The biggest difference is in labor. Labor specifically related to spraying, less spraying in second crop, and lesser use of ag chemicals. The difference is about $50 less per hectare in second soy than first soy.
Juan says this farm receives about 40 to 45 inches of precipitation annually, but rain is by far the biggest factor in limiting yield. Irrigation isn't widely used in Argentina. As of 2009, only 4 million acres were equipped for irrigation. The long growing seasons of South America mean farmers here can get 2 crops during 1 year. But in areas like Mato Grosso, the climate also makes farmers battle insects year-round.
The number of generations we have here, the tropical climate, it's really easier for the insects to multiply. So we have this number of generations, so we have resistance going through all the generations. So probably this is the biggest difference.
Last year, one pest caused almost $1 billion worth of damage to crops. The Helicoverpa caterpillar emerged again towards the beginning of this growing season and made headlines. While the experience last year helped some farmers control the caterpillar this year, Ivo Girbagin says protecting his soybeans from the Helicoverpa accounted for a large share of increased production costs.
So for this year specifically, what impacted our cost of production a lot was the pests, the Helicoverpa to start with, and then later we also had another pest that caused some damage to our crops, so we had to spend a lot more money to control those pests this year.
Ivo Gir expects his beans near Cerizo will yield in the low to mid-50s in terms of bushels per acre, but farmers in both South American countries are very aware of profitability levels in 2014. The growing conditions vary greatly among the three top producing soybean nations. Roberto Negrini manages a farm near Sinop in Mato Grosso. His fields were some of the first out in this area and yielding a little less than 50 bushels per acre. Roberto has visited farms in Iowa and Illinois and says production between the U.S. and Brazil is similar, but operations in the U.S. have lower input costs. He also says the most noticeable disparities take place after the harvest is over.
And then the other big difference I noticed was in terms of logistics. In this case, that's a real big difference. A lot of farms in the U.S. with their own silos and dryers, so they can be much faster and more efficient after they harvest the crop and send the crop away. One thing that is very, very different is roads and the transportation. In the U.S. is way better than what we have here in Brazil. But maybe it's part of the whole this whole issue is just that producers in the U.S. have been growing grains for much longer than we have here in Brazil, and especially in our region here. So maybe with some more time here in Brazil, we might be able to catch up with producers in the U.S.
We'll explore that issue in depth next week during our final installment of our series. It'll detail the difficulties farmers face after harvest. For those in Argentina, that includes a 35% export tax and a rapidly fluctuating currency. We'll show you how producers are now holding their soybeans on site to fight the devaluation. In Brazil, the lack of adequate transportation has proven to be a large expense for farmers and could hinder further soybean growth in the country. Solar energy provides a boost to the pump and center pivot system operated by the Beller brothers near Lindsay. The February Nebraska farmer explains how Terry and Mike Beller partnered with Lindsay Corporation to build a large solar array last summer to help offset electricity costs of operating the pump and pivot. The project included federal tax credits and a USDA Renewable Energy for America grant and could be paid for in less than 7 years. Is tied in with the electric grid, so excess energy not used in the off-season is metered back to the Beller family. You can read more about the project and how it works in the February Nebraska Farmer. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Before we get to the main forecast, let's kind of take a little look at what's happened in this last week. Of course, we had the snowfall that hit the western part of the state with a couple of series of storms that moved into the central Rockies and the spillover effect into the western portions of the state, particularly the Panhandle. We've seen broad-based coverage anywhere from about 3 to 4 inches North Platte westward into the Scottsbluff area where there was consistent 5 to 7 inch snowfall totals. And that's very welcome. It's been a rather active period for the last couple of weeks, and we've even seen some significant snow accumulations in the central Rockies. In fact, at the pace we're going, it looks to be a banner snow year unless we go into an abrupt drying trend. But overall, the prospects for significant runoff from the North Platte and South Platte watersheds looks to be there right now, and that could be very welcome news for basically Seminole, Pathfinder, and Lake McConaughey's. After the last couple years of well below normal lake levels, this would be a very welcome. Further eastward, we did see several frontal boundaries move through the state, more of nuisance snows than anything else, creating some slick conditions, but not much in the way of significant moisture. Now we're going into a little bit of a warming trend. It looks to be pretty brief, basically about a week, and then as we go into next weekend, yet another major storm may start to materialize in the central Rockies and push out into the plains. So for cattle producers, I would pay particularly close attention as we get into later next week, because this could be a very wet snow which could cause some problems during the calving season. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this week will progress. And as we go to the upper air models, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is a system that moved through the last 24 hours is starting to move to the east of us. In its wake, we're going to get ridging building into the region, and so we should have some fairly nice conditions this weekend. Temperatures will start to warm up across western Nebraska. It'll be a little bit cooler, closer to normal across eastern Nebraska, but as we get into Sunday, we'll start to see 50s well across the southern portion of the state, and a little system is going to zip through Sunday night and into Monday, and you can see by Monday it's going to be all the way over to Ohio. So we don't expect a lot of moisture with this system, but again, it could create a brief period of scattered sprinkles to moderate snow across the eastern part of the state, and I would expect accumulations will be less than an inch in most locations except extreme northeastern Nebraska. Now as we go into the day on Tuesday, what we are going to notice is that another system passes to our north. The warm air lies right across southern Nebraska, the colder air to the north, so there's going to be quite a divergence in temperatures across the state. And as we get into Wednesday, we will see another system moving across the northern plains. We'll have a zonal flow, so fairly nice conditions across the state under basically sunny to partly cloudy skies. As we get into Thursday, we start to see this trough taking place in the western United States, so we're going to have a good fetch of warm air ahead of it. Temperatures should be well into the 40s and 50s across a good portion of the state. And as we get into Friday, here comes this system, and it's going to bring a lot of moisture into our region with the potential for significant snowfall. So we look at the temperature forecast. We'll see the warmest temperatures this weekend, a slight cool down on Monday with that system coming through. And then as we go through the end of the week, we'll see warmer temperatures in the southeast with snow accumulations possible across the panhandle. In terms of the 8 to 14 day forecast, we start to see the cold air rebuilding in the west, moving toward Nebraska, and in terms of precipitation, a very wet trend from next Thursday through the following Tuesday.
Thanks, Al. Our interviews from today are available on the Market Journal website and through our mobile app as part of the February 14th episode. That includes our discussions with Roy Smith, Tina Barrett, and Bruce Broderson. Our coverage from Brazil and Argentina is available on the Market Journal website under a special tab. You can see it by visiting marketjournal.unl.edu/South America. Next week, Mike Briggs will be our cattle market analyst and will show you the difficulties South American farmers face once their crops are harvested. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.